Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hey listeners, it has been forever since I checked in and I took some important time off to recalibrate and think about this podcast. But to tell you the truth, so many of you reached out to me and said, hey, I hope you're releasing another episode soon, that I am back in the swing of things in 2021. And in fact, today I want to talk about something really important for new and advanced freelancers alike, and that is how to get out of analysis paralysis. This is actually something I was stuck in for quite a while when I up-leveled my business, but even in relation to this podcast in the last couple of months. I was overanalyzing things, I was making it more difficult than it needed to be, and ultimately I felt really stuck, like I couldn't move forward. And I think that happens a lot for different kinds of freelancers and can be very frustrating no matter how it happens to you. So one of the things that's most helpful when you feel that you're stuck in analysis paralysis, overwhelm of information, you feel like you don't have what you need to go forward, is to really just take the time to sit and think about it. So for me, I made the decision towards the end of 2020 to take a break from the podcast for a little bit and make sure that it still fit in with my marketing goals. I didn't set a date by which I would decide whether or not to continue the podcast or to pull it and switch for a different type of content. I really just wanted some time to really think through it. And some of the things that we did were gather data on podcast downloads. We took a look at how many people were using or requesting the podcast or mentioning to me in things like LinkedIn messages when they connected that they had heard of the podcast. And so those were great starting points for me to start gathering that data. And it really did take a while to make that decision. But in early January, I was discussing with my business manager. I said, I don't know what it is. I feel really stuck, like I can't move forward on this. And I know you're waiting for me to record more episodes, but for whatever reason, I'm just not ready to dive back into it. So what's important with analysis paralysis is that you don't want this issue or this decision that you have to make to linger there forever. It could be adding a new service area to your freelance business. It could be pivoting out of freelancing altogether. It could be changing your prices. You don't want to put a firm deadline on it, but what I do like to do is build time into my calendar to think about this task or this project. So I'll carve out a couple of hours, and even though I'm not forcing myself to come to a decision about the thing by the time I wrap up that particular session, it is a good way for me to have that time set aside and to kind of think about all of the different factors that go into making that decision. So when you're stuck in analysis paralysis, the first thing to do is to try to figure out why. What is holding you back? Is it truly that you don't have enough information to be able to move forward? There's such a fine line here. When you are a new freelancer, it's easy to feel like you need to spend weeks or months gathering all the data, reading all the blogs, listening to all the podcasts before you launch. And even as you expand your freelance business, there's so many different decisions that we have to make that the decision fatigue and the overwhelm of having that responsibility to make all those choices can really weigh on you heavily. So try to figure out why it is that you feel stuck on this particular issue. It's not always the surface level answer either. For me with this podcast, I felt like it was a really valuable tool that was helping people, but it had been really quiet for a while as far as feedback from people who were telling me things like, oh, I specifically found you through your podcast, or I listen to your podcast all the time. And so for me, the reason I didn't feel comfortable moving forward with it until I'd had some time to think was to verify that this really was the best use of my time in creating content. Did I have the potential to reach the most people, to grow my following the most in this way, to take people who were listening to the podcast who would engage with me in other ways? Or was it time to use a new marketing method? And I didn't have the details when I first sort of hit this wall and felt stuck. So I had to figure out what are those details that I need to gather, because lack of information for me was the reason that I didn't feel comfortable moving forward. So from the why, we figure out how do we address that. Is it that you need to hire a coach to talk through a particular thing? Is it the lack of knowledge? Is it that you are feeling pressurized by something? Is it imposter syndrome? Digging into the why gives you the beginning of that roadmap to figure out what it is that you are going to do next. And I find that analysis paralysis most frequently affects new freelancers, but it can affect you at any level. The reason that it's higher rates for beginners is because there are so many decisions you have to make at that stage in your business, and there are so many things that you have to be actively doing at that point in time. So you have to be coming up with a marketing method. You have to be deciding who your ideal clients are going to be. What is the pricing that you're going to provide? How much time in your schedule do you really have to freelance? And the initial motivation and excitement of launching your own business can quickly peter out if you're feeling overloaded by all of those details, or you have fear around making the wrong decision. So dig into the why first. Once you've figured out what it is that's making you feel stuck on not being able to make this decision, start brainstorming possible solutions. It could be talking something out with your spouse. It could be doing some of the mindset work and journaling. It might be hiring a coach to talk through something and to mind map out what your next steps are going to be. Maybe it's buying a book or a course or joining a Facebook community. Sometimes that gathering of information or the validating of your questions or ideas is what is holding you back from being able to make the next step, the next jump. So it's very important to think about all of the different ways that you may be able to move out of this stuck place. It's hardest to move out of your analysis paralysis and stuck place when you feel like you're the source of the problem. So no one else could make my decision about bringing this podcast back. I couldn't outsource that. I didn't really feel like talking with a coach would really help me work through it. I knew it was a decision that I had to come to on my own. And so the factors that I considered were not just like those hard numbers around how many people are downloading and is this really reaching people and are people who are listening converting to email subscribers and all of that. For me, it was about, if I don't do this podcast, what else will I be doing to regularly provide content to my readers aside from my email newsletter? Because we ditched blogging a couple of years ago, my podcast has been the most consistent way for me to share material with my audience. For those who are in my Facebook group, Mastering Your Freelance Life with Laura, I'm in there most frequently doing free trainings and teachings and webinars around my coaching and course launches. But that had to be kind of working in connection with other organic content that was going out there. For a long time, that was my podcast. Longtime listener of the show, but haven't joined my Facebook group, it's free, and best of all, it's where all of my trainings and interactions happen for the most part, so it's a great place to get some insight on your freelance business and be inspired by other freelancers looking to scale. You can join the Mastering Your Freelance Life with Laura Facebook group at tinyurl.com/Upwork group. So that's the third step of getting out of your stuck point with analysis paralysis. What is the cost of you making either decision that you have on the table? So what would the cost be of me stopping the process of podcasting? Well, I'd get more hours back in my schedule, and my OBM would get more hours back in her schedule as well. So those initially seemed like benefits. But what is the cost of not doing it outside of that? Well, I have a podcast that shows up for people that maybe they find organically, but the content seems old. So maybe they think that this podcast is defunct or that none of the material that's shared there is great. It's been a substantial source of traffic for me to grow my email list and to grow my course subscribers and overall visibility. And so I would lose that, and I would need to think about a way to replace that if I chose not to go forward with the podcast. So I like to take a piece of paper and divide it into two sections and put on either side the two primary decisions that this boils down to. And if you feel like you're facing like 37 decisions or something like that, keep boiling it down until it is something where you are thinking about A or B. So don't try to make every decision in your business at the same time, but think about, what is the one thing that I feel really stuck on right now? So maybe it's that you want to write a book. So what are all of the impacts of writing a book, and what are all of the impacts of not writing a book? This also gives you personal stakes because it digs into your mindset work to realize how much you're truly connected to this particular thing. I've shared before that I often reach out to experts and have conversations with them before deciding whether or not to move forward with a new arm of my business. And a great example of this is when about 2 years ago, I reached out to a public speaking expert to learn a little bit more about what it would be like to be a full-time public speaker. In having that conversation with her, I realized there were a lot of downsides to being a full-time public speaker that didn't really gel with my lifestyle. And it was only in talking with her and creating this 2-part list of what would happen if I did it, what would happen if I didn't do it, I realized that I really didn't want to do it. Yes, it decreased my possibility of visibility and paid speaking gigs and relying less on my freelance work, but it also meant traveling and staying in hotel rooms 200 nights a year. And for me, that wasn't something that I wanted to have to cope with or recognize that that was the shift I'd made in my business. So the cost of doing the thing in that case was actually a big negative. You'll also be able to check in with your brain in doing this. How much do you really want this particular thing? What is the true cost of not doing what you want to do? So let's go back to my podcast example. My company mission is to impact 50,000 freelancers in the next 5 years. In order to do that, I have to have a really specific marketing strategy, and I need to execute consistently on it. So when I really dug into how much is my podcast a part of that process, I realized that I was leaving a lot on the table by potentially walking away from it because I was essentially leaving out a great source of some of those 50,000 freelancers that I could help. So this process of the 2-sided list is really key for you to think about what do you want, because initially something can seem great and it's actually just a shiny object. Maybe you saw on someone's Facebook profile, that they recently started a craft-based business and they made $400,000 last year doing it. And so you get attracted by the initial idea, but it's in thinking about it and researching it where you decide what the costs of doing it and not doing it are. So in that process, you're asking your brain to go, how much do I really want to do this? And how much of this is just because I was intrigued by the idea and I was thinking about doing it? Because that's completely different than really resonating with an idea. One thing I talk about with my coaching clients often is that it's a real challenge for us entrepreneurs because we have no shortage of ideas. There are literally dozens of things that we could be working on, and we tend to get distracted by all kinds of stories and other options. Some of these are real passions and real things that we should pursue, and others popped up there because we think it would be easy or we think it would make money or so-and-so's doing it, and so why shouldn't I? Those are not good reasons to pursue something. So when a new idea pops up into your head, do a check-in with yourself. Don't commit to it right away. Don't hire a coach to do that thing. Don't pay for the expensive course. Let it sit for a couple of weeks and see if you continuously come back to that idea and go, you know what? I'm still really being pulled by that concept. I'm thinking about it when I wake up. I'm bummed that I haven't been able to start working on it yet, because that's a real gut check on something you did want to do rather than just a shiny object. Recognizing that analysis paralysis happens and coming up with a plan to navigate around it will help give you a plan for what you'll do when it does happen, because it's normal. It happens to everybody. But doing these exercises can give you the space needed to think about it, to research it, to talk with the right people about it, but also help you avoid putting something off for 4, 6, or 12 months. I've noticed that sometimes there are projects on my back burner that have been sitting there forever. And in doing the mindset work to figure out why, I might realize I'm just not connected to them at all anymore and I can let them go. Or it's something that I need to quit. Or it's something I'm really upset at myself about that I haven't taken forward action on. And so I figure out what is the step for me to get reinvigorated for that thing. I bought a coaching package last year, for example, from a fiction book expert, and we mapped out a whole outline for a book, and I never did anything with it after May. Well, that's on me. So I have to do the mindset work to figure out, why didn't I move that forward? Am I just not connected to it anymore? Do I need to mentally close the loop of putting that pressure on myself and having that be one more thing out there going, oh, you never finished that. You never figured out what your next steps were going to be there. Or do I need to adjust and build that back into my schedule because now the time is right, or I feel like it's more important. Nobody else can really make these decisions for you, but talking it through with someone else can help you get clarity. It's often because we're able to talk ourselves into or out of what we wanted to do anyways, but we hadn't carved out the space in our schedule or our mental area to be able to process that. So I hope these tips help you navigate through and around analysis paralysis as a freelancer.